The sun filtered through the front windows of my little flower shop, casting warm stripes across the wooden floor. I called it Petal and Pine, tucked away in a quiet corner of Evanston, just outside Chicago. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A cozy, messy sanctuary filled with lavender, roses, tulips, and too many coffee mugs with half-finished tea. At the back, my 7-year-old daughter, Lila, sat at her tiny art table, humming while she colored. She lifted her drawing a big sunflower with sky blue petals. "Mom, what if sunflowers were blue instead of yellow?" I chuckled. "Then I'd say you just invented a new species, Professor Lila." She beamed, and for a second, all the stress melted. But reality always returns. Being a single mom and business owner doesn't exactly give you the luxury of staying in happy moments too long. I returned to my laptop, putting the final touches on a bridal bouquet design for the Kendricks' wedding next weekend. Big event, big money. I needed it. The landline rang a number I knew too well. I sighed before picking it up. "Hi, Mom. How's the Kendrick wedding coming along?" My mom's voice always carried that dry, judgmental undertone, like she was grading me through the phone. "On schedule," I said, keeping my voice upbeat. "Cutting it close again, aren't you, Dana?" she replied. "That's Judith Winters for you. Retired attorney. Runs her household like a courtroom. Expectations high, tolerance low, especially for daughters who didn't go Ivy League or marry well." My older sister, Cassandra, the golden child, ticked all those boxes. We exchanged a few more tense pleasantries. Then she got to the real reason for her call. "Cass can't take Leo to his school meeting tomorrow. If you have that wedding thing, just drop Lila at my place." I checked my schedule board. I had a massive flower delivery for a corporate client tomorrow. Usually I'd ask the daycare for late hours, but they were closed for staff training. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'll drop her off at 10. "Thanks." "Of course," she said. But her tone said, "Don't mess this up." After hanging up, I glanced at Lila. She was drawing again, but her face had lost its light. "You'll be at Grandma's tomorrow," I said gently. She looked up. "Will Leo be there?" "Probably." And honestly, that made me uneasy too. Leo was 10 going on teenager, and ever since my sister's messy divorce, he'd become unpredictable, especially around Lila. Lila didn't respond, just nodded and kept coloring, but her hand trembled a bit. That broke my heart. That night, we ate mac and cheese, lit a cinnamon candle, and pretended the world was soft. Our apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, mismatched furniture, and a window with a view of the park, but we made it feel like home. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "It's just one day." I stayed up late reviewing tomorrow's deliveries. When I checked my inbox, there it was, an email from Mom. "Drop Lila at 10. Cass will be in and out. I'll make oatmeal cookies. Don't worry, don't worry." Classic Judith saying the right thing while missing the point entirely. I replied with a simple thanks. "See you at 10. Please look after her." That night, I couldn't sleep. My gut kept twisting. The next morning, I braided Lila's hair while she held her teddy bear. I fixed the tier on her favorite purple dress last week. It looked perfect on her. She looked at me with pleading eyes. "Mom, can I stay at the shop and help?" I crouched to her level. "I'd love that. But today is chaos. I promise I'll come get you the moment I'm done." She didn't argue, just nodded with quiet acceptance, the kind of quiet that shouldn't exist in a child. Judith's house was a modern fortress in an upscale neighborhood. When she opened the door, perfectly groomed and stone-faced, I felt that old familiar pressure in my chest. Leo's bike was already in the driveway. "I thought Cass had meetings," I said. "She's home for a few hours," Mom replied. "Don't worry. Lila will be fine." Lila didn't let go of my hand. "Promise you'll come back soon, I swear." But something about this drop-off felt wrong. I brushed it off. By mid-afternoon, I was ahead of schedule. The last arrangement had just left the van when I glanced at the clock. 4:27 p.m. I made it to Mom's by 4:40, rang the bell. Nothing. I heard faint voices from the backyard and walked around. There was Leo, riding his bike in circles. Cass was lounging on a deck chair, sunglasses on, scrolling through her phone. "Where's Lila?" I asked. Cass waved vaguely. "Inside, I guess." Alarm bells rang. I rushed inside, calling her name. In the guest room, said she was tired. Mom answered flatly from the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was just any other day. I bolted upstairs. The moment I opened that door, my world cracked. Lila was curled up on the bed facing the wall. Her tiny shoulders trembled. When she turned, I gasped. There was blood on her forehead, caked in her hair. Tears had carved streaks down her cheeks. I ran to her. "Baby, what happened?" "I fell," she whispered. "From the jungle gym." But the way her eyes darted away told a different story. I scooped her into my arms and marched back downstairs. "She's bleeding," I snapped. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Mom shrugged. "It's a scratch. Kids fall," Cass added. "Leo gets worse every week. She's fine." My voice cracked. "This is not fine." "You didn't even call me? You're always so dramatic," Mom said, rolling her eyes. I couldn't breathe. I got Lila in the car and sped to the emergency room. The whole drive, she clutched her bear, silent. I tried talking to her, but she just stared out the window, distant. At the hospital, the pediatric ER was quiet. Bright animal murals on the walls. Nurses with soft smiles. But none of that softened what the doctor would soon tell me. Her name was Dr. Keller. Gentle voice, steady hands. She examined Lila, asked some light questions, then said something that froze my blood. "This wound doesn't look like a fall. It looks like blunt force trauma." My stomach dropped. "And there are older scars. Faded but distinct. On her back. Her arm. I felt the walls close in." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to talk to her. Carefully. In private. She may be afraid to tell the truth." I stepped outside. My mind was screaming. Had my baby been getting hurt while I thought she was safe? Who would let that happen? And what kind of monsters would hide it? I sat in that cold hospital hallway like I was trapped underwater. Everything sounded muffled, nurses' shoes squeaking, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the occasional beeping monitor, but all I could hear was my heartbeat in my ears. Fast, hard, angry. The door to the exam room finally opened, and Dr. Keller stepped out. Her expression was calm, but her eyes weren't. She nodded toward a consultation room down the hall. "Can we talk?" I followed her in. She sat across from me, folding her hands on the table like she was about to deliver a verdict. "Physically, Lila will be okay. The cut will need a few stitches, but thankfully, no concussion." I let out a shaky breath. "But," she added, her voice soft but firm, "the shape and location of that wound are suspicious." Suspicious. God, I hated that word right then. She continued. "The trauma looks more like she was struck by something with an edge. Square or rectangular. Not something she'd likely hit falling off a jungle gym." I blinked at her, stunned. "You mean someone hit her?" Dr. Keller didn't answer immediately. She leaned in slightly. "I also found faint scarring, older injuries on her back and arms. They weren't fresh, but they weren't accidental either." I felt my stomach twist. A lump grew in my throat, thick and bitter. "Lila says she fell," I whispered. "I asked her too," Dr. Keller said gently. "But her body language, her tension, it doesn't match that story." I stared at the table. My fingers dug into my palms. I didn't want this to be true. I didn't want to imagine anyone, especially not family, hurting my little girl. "Could it be? My nephew?" I asked. "Leo?" She hesitated for a second. "It's possible. But what worries me more is that the adults in that house didn't treat this injury seriously. That indifference is alarming." She was right. My mother's shrug. Cass scrolling through her phone. Lila alone upstairs, bleeding and crying. My skin crawled thinking about it. Dr. Keller added, "I'd like to keep Lila overnight." Observation, yes, but also, we have a counselor who works with children in trauma cases. If Lila is hiding something, she may open up in a more relaxed setting. I nodded, still in a daze. That night, I sat beside her hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall as she slept. Her hand was curled around her teddy bear, the same one she clung to on the drive over. What scared me wasn't just that someone might have hurt her. It was that she believed she had to stay quiet about it. Why? Who made her feel unsafe to speak? The next morning, a new doctor came to see us, Dr. Aaron Levy, a child psychologist, soft-spoken, calm, in that way people have when they deal with fragile things every day. He asked if he could spend a little time with Lila. Not questions, he said, just play. Drawing, toys, building trust. I waited in the cafeteria, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee I never drank. An hour later, he returned and sat across from me. She didn't talk about what happened directly, he said. But children say a lot without words. I leaned forward. And what did she say? He pulled a small notebook from his coat. In her drawings, there's a clear presence of fear. A boy, aggressive, taller, angry, and adults in the background watching, but not helping. That was enough for me. I need proof, I whispered. They'll deny everything. My mother's a retired lawyer. She'll twist this until I look crazy. Dr. Levy looked thoughtful. I can't tell you what to do, but if there's a way to discreetly gather information, it could help. The idea hit me hard and fast. The teddy bear. She never went anywhere without it. That night, I called Terry, my college friend, tech nerd, and the one person who never judged me for how messy my life got. Can you put a camera in Lila's bear? I asked. Like a nanny cam? Yeah. I'll need the night. He came over with a tiny hidden cam and a transmitter. We tucked it behind the stuffing and sewed it up like new. Lila would never know, but it could be the difference between guessing and knowing. I told Lila the bear had magical powers now. It watches over you, I said. If anything scary happens, it can tell me. Okay? She clutched the bear to her chest. Will it protect me? I smiled, but it was shaky. Yes, always. The next day, I called my mom. Hey, I said, trying to sound calm. I need a few hours to catch up at the shop. Could you watch Lila again? She barely hesitated. Of course. Leo would love that. I almost dropped the phone. That's what scared me. That casual enthusiasm. As if none of this mattered. As if everything was normal. The next morning, I dropped Lila off with her backpack and bear in hand. I kissed her goodbye, my heart hammering in my chest. Be brave, I whispered. I'll try, she whispered back. Then I drove straight to the cafe across the street and opened the app. Terry had set up on my phone. The camera was live. At first, it was calm. Lila was coloring in the living room. Mom came in once with a tray of snacks. Cass drifted through with a phone in her hand. Leo was in the background watching her, too closely. An hour passed. Then everything changed. Leo led Lila outside. He pointed at her teddy bear. Let me see that. No, she said softly. Don't be a brat. She held the bear tighter. He grabbed her wrist. She yelped. The video went shaky, the audio full of rustling. Stop! That hurts! He shoved her. The bear flew onto the grass, and from its new angle, I watched as he twisted her arm, pinned her down, and said something so chilling, I had to pause the feed. If you tell anyone, he hissed, I'll do worse next time. My whole body shook. Then, Cass's voice. Leo, leave her alone! I exhaled finally. But what came next made my blood boil. Cass didn't yell, didn't scold. She laughed. You two are always so dramatic. Lila was crying. Cass just walked away. I couldn't take it anymore. I got in my car and drove straight there. Lila was sitting alone in the yard, her bear in her lap. Come on, baby, I said quietly. I buckled her in, drove in silence. My hands were shaking on the wheel. That night, I sent the footage to Dr. Keller. Then I filed a formal report. No more questions, no more doubt. The truth was finally out, and I was done being quiet. The next morning, the sun came up like nothing had happened. As if the earth didn't care that my world had cracked open. I stood in the kitchen staring at the toaster, hand on the counter, waiting for bread. I didn't even want. Lila sat at the table, legs swinging, still holding that bear like it was a lifeline. Her eyes were clearer than the day before, but something had changed. Not gone, but quieter. Settled. I'm not scared today, she said. I turned toward her. Really? She nodded. The bear told me you saw. That nearly broke me. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. Unknown number? Miss Winters? A calm voice. This is Officer Ramirez from the Evanston Child Services Unit. We received a report regarding possible abuse involving your daughter. I'd like to set up a home visit this afternoon if that works for you. Absolutely, I said without hesitation. This was it. No more passive waiting. The story was going public now, whether my family liked it or not. By noon, Officer Ramirez arrived. Late 30s, soft-spoken, eyes like he'd seen too much but hadn't lost his empathy. He sat on our flower-patterned couch across from Lila, who held her bear and stared at his badge. He asked gentle questions, never pushing, just creating space. And for the first time, Lila spoke. "Leo hurts me," she whispered. "When no one's watching, and when they are, they pretend not to see." Ramirez didn't flinch, just took notes. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That was very brave." After he left, I emailed the footage to the department. Every second, no edits. I made sure they saw it exactly as I had. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept watching the clock, as if the hours would change something. They didn't. The next day, I got the call I had been waiting for and dreading. "We're formally opening an investigation into child endangerment and neglect involving your mother, Judith Winters, and sister, Cassandra Hayes." The words hung in the air like storm clouds. I thanked them and hung up. Then I picked up my phone again, took a deep breath, and dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Dana, we need to talk." There was a pause. "About what?" "About Leo?" "About Lila. About the way you both let her get hurt." The pause grew longer. "You're accusing your own family?" she said at last, her voice cold and clipped. "No. I'm holding them accountable," I replied. "There's a difference. You're overreacting." "I have video, Mom. I know everything." Silence. "Then, you don't know what kind of pressure Cass is under. You're always so quick to judge. You think you're perfect because you have a little flower shop and your kid colors inside the lines." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't make this about me. This is about Lila. And you failed her." I hung up before she could say another word. An hour later, Cassandra showed up at the shop. I should have known she'd come in person. She never liked being told no through a phone. She pushed through the door like a storm, her hair pulled back tight, lips lined like she was headed to court. "How dare you?" she hissed. I stepped out from behind the counter, arms crossed. "You let your son hurt my daughter," repeatedly. "He's a child," she yelled. "Kids fight." "You're turning this into some kind of soap opera," he threatened her. I said calmly. He twisted her arm. He knocked her down. "And you watched. That's a lie. I have video," her face drained of color. "You recorded my son?" I protected my daughter. Cass's mouth opened, then closed. No comeback. "Child Services is involved now," I said. "This is bigger than your pride. You're trying to destroy this family." She spat. "No," I said. "You did that all on your own." She left without another word. I closed the shop early that day. Not out of fear, just exhaustion. It felt like I'd been fighting a hurricane with bare hands. But that night, something unexpected happened. Lila smiled. Not big, not wide, but real. We curled up on the couch, watching a baking show, and she giggled when the cake collapsed on screen. The sound of her laugh cracked something open in me. I hadn't heard it in days. A few days later, the caseworker called. "Judith and Cassandra are officially under investigation. Based on the evidence, supervised visitation is now in effect. Lila will not be allowed at their residence." I cried not because I was sad, but because someone finally believed us. Word got out fast. It always does in families like mine. Relatives started calling. Some offered support. Most stayed silent. A few said I was blowing things out of proportion. But I didn't care. Lila mattered more than family image. I took a few days off from the shop. My friend Mia covered the orders. I spent those days with Lila painting rocks in the park, watching cartoons, making pancakes shaped like stars. And at night, she stopped waking up screaming. The nightmares faded, little by little. A week later, Ramirez called again. "We're moving forward. Leo will be placed under behavioral supervision. Therapy sessions begin next week." "And my mother and sister?" I asked. "They're being charged with neglect. Possible community service, family counseling mandated." It wasn't jail, but it was something. A start. That night, Lila sat beside me with a new drawing. It was a picture of her, and me, and the bear, standing on a big green hill with a bright yellow sun. I gave the bear a cape. She said, "He's a hero." I smiled. "You're the real hero." She leaned her head against my arm. We stayed like that for a long time. The storm hadn't passed completely, but we'd found shelter. And inside that shelter, hope was starting to bloom again. They say justice moves slow, but when it starts rolling, it doesn't stop. A week after supervised visitation was enforced, a family court date was set. It felt surreal walking into a courthouse over something that happened within my own bloodline. You grow up believing family protects you. No one tells you what to do when they're the ones causing the harm. I held Lila's hand tighter as we stepped through the metal detectors. Her bear was tucked under her arm as always, the stitched-up spot almost invisible now. She didn't ask where we were going, she just followed, brave and quiet. Inside, I spotted my mother sitting on the bench, legs crossed, heels tapping the floor like Morse code. She wore that familiar expression, calm, controlled, like she was simply attending a formal event. Cass sat next to her, stiff and defensive. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer did most of the glaring. I didn't bring a lawyer, just Officer Ramirez and Dr. Levy, who both volunteered to speak on Lila's behalf. Their presence felt like armor. The judge, a middle-aged woman with kind but sharp eyes, called us in. The hearing wasn't long, just statements, evidence review, and some painfully sterile words. Failure to supervise, emotional endangerment, protective orders. The footage from the teddy bear was shown. The courtroom was silent, except for the audio, the sound of Leo's voice threatening my daughter. That silence was louder than any scream. Cass's face collapsed. My mother, she didn't flinch. She just stared ahead like none of it applied to her. The judge ruled for 6 months of no unsupervised contact. Lila would stay solely in my care. Both my mother and Cass were ordered into court-mandated therapy and community service. Leo, too, would begin weekly sessions with a behavioral therapist and school counselor. It wasn't a dramatic victory, no slamming gavels or gasps from the crowd, just facts, accountability. But it was enough. When we walked out of that courtroom, the sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. That evening, Lila asked, "Can I sleep in my own bed tonight?" I nodded, even though I'd gotten used to her crawling into mine around 2 a.m. Every night since the hospital. That night, she stayed in her room, and I cried in mine. But it wasn't sadness anymore. It was release. The next few weeks were quiet, and quiet was a gift. We settled into new routines, morning walks before school, Friday night grilled cheese, weekend trips to the library. I got used to hearing her laugh again. At first, it felt like listening to a forgotten song. One afternoon, I picked her up from school, and her teacher pulled me aside. "She's been opening up," Miss Lang said gently, drawing. "Talking about her bear, her family. You're doing a good job, Dana." No one had said that to me in a long time. Back at the shop, business picked up again. Spring had melted into early summer, and wedding season was back in full swing. My assistant, Mia, took care of most of the front desk work, so I could focus on arrangements and deliveries. One day, while I was restocking peonies in the cooler, the bell above the shop door chimed. I stepped out and froze. It was my mother. She looked different. Not younger or older, just smaller, less put together. She held a paper bag in her hands, and for the first time I could remember, she seemed uncertain. "I made something," she said, holding the bag out. "I didn't take it. Not yet." "What is it?" "A quilt," she replied. "For Lila's birthday." There was a long pause between us, the kind where years of silence wedge themselves between two people. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added, "but I want to start over. I'm in counseling." "Court mandated." "Yes, but I kept going even after the sessions ended." I looked at her, trying to find the woman I once admired under all the layers of control and pride. "I'll give it to Lila," I said softly, "but don't expect her to understand yet." "I don't," she whispered, and just like that, she turned and walked out. I stood there for a long time holding that paper bag. That night, I gave the quilt to Lila. It was soft, patchworked with pale yellows and sky blues. "Did Grandma make this?" she asked. "She did." Lila traced one of the stitches. "It's pretty," she didn't say more, but she kept it. That was enough for now. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Cass. I almost didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the red decline button, but something in me said, "Hear her out." Her voice was sharp as ever, but tired. I got approved for family counseling. I'm taking it. Because I want Leo to get better. That's good, I said cautiously. I'm not ready to apologize yet, she continued. I'm still angry, but maybe one day. I'm not asking you to be perfect, I told her. I just need you to be safe. For Leo, for Lila. I get it, she said. And I'll keep my distance. It wasn't peace, but it was something. A small seed, maybe. Not forgiveness. Just the chance of it. By midsummer, Lila had stopped asking if Leo would be at Grandma's. She had stopped waking up afraid of shadows. The teddy bear still sat on her bed, but now it was more friend than shield. Dr. Levy said she was healing fast, that her drawings were lighter now. More trees, more sky, fewer scribbles of angry boys. One evening she handed me a new picture. It was a family, just two people, me and her, holding hands beneath a pink tree. You didn't draw the bear, I said. She smiled. We don't need him anymore. And something in me cracked open again. Not pain this time, pride. By the time August rolled in, our lives had taken on a new rhythm. Slower, calmer, like the world had finally stopped spinning so fast. It wasn't perfect, healing never is, but there was space now. Room to breathe. Room for Lila to just be a kid again. And for me, I was finally learning how to live without waiting for the next hit. The flower shop bloomed, literally and figuratively. Locals started calling me the flower whisperer, which made Lila laugh every time. She made me a paper badge that said Official Whisperer of Petal and Pine and taped it to the register. Mia snapped a picture of us laughing under the string lights I'd hung across the ceiling. I printed it and pinned it behind the counter. It reminded me of what peace looked like. It wasn't loud. It didn't make an entrance. It just arrived, softly. But peace doesn't erase the past. It just gives you room to sort through it. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch of our apartment with a cup of tea in my hands. Lila was at a playdate. The sun was starting to dip. Everything looked gold. And for the first time in months, I let myself think about before, not just the hospital or the courtroom. Before all of that, back when I thought I was failing because I didn't have what my family valued: degrees, power, control. I remembered the way Cass used to make me feel like I was a hobbyist playing grown-up. The way Mom would comment on my little shop, but now I saw it for what it was. They clung to control because they feared losing it, and I had let them define what success looked like for too long. My success was different. It was gentler, rooted, not flashy, and it was mine. A few days later, Mom called. I didn't answer the first time, or the second, but on the third try, something inside me softened. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe exhaustion, maybe both. Hi, Mom. I was wondering, she said slowly, if we could talk in person. No lawyers. No tension. I let the silence stretch a little before replying. Okay, we met at a small cafe near the lake, neutral territory. The kind of place where strangers laugh over iced lattes and arguments feel out of place. She was already there, seated by the window, hands wrapped around a mug like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. You look tired, I said. She gave a half smile. I am. We didn't talk right away, just sat there with the awkwardness between us, like two people who used to know each other but forgot how. Then she said something I didn't expect. I watched the video again, the one from the bear. I didn't speak. She took a breath. The way Lila looked, that's what broke me. Not Leo, not Cass. Her voice trembled. Just a little. I thought I was being strong, staying out of things, letting you handle it, but I wasn't strong. I was silent, and silence is how bad things grow. That hit harder than I thought it would. Do you still think I was overreacting? I asked. She shook her head. No, you were right, and I'm sorry I didn't believe you when it mattered most. I nodded, still unsure what to do with that apology. I don't expect forgiveness, she added, but I hope someday you might let me try again. I looked at her, really looked, and for once, didn't see a judge or a critic. I just saw an old woman carrying the weight of her own mistakes. We'll see, I said. And that was enough for now. That weekend, Lila and I visited an open house just outside town. Not because we needed to move, not urgently, but something in me felt ready, ready for more sunlight, more space, a garden of our own. The house was small, one story, with chipped blue shutters and a tree swing in the back. Nothing fancy. But when Lila stepped onto the grass and said, "It smells like freedom here," I knew. We made an offer 2 days later. It was accepted, Mia cried when I told her. Said the shop would feel empty without Lila running through the back with her fairy wings on. I promised to visit every day. We both knew I wouldn't, but we liked the lie. We packed slowly, intentionally. No rush, no pressure. Each box a small goodbye to a life that had held us through the storm. I found old pictures of Lila when she was a baby, chubby cheeks, gummy smile, wild curls. I kept one in my wallet, a reminder of who I was fighting for. When moving day arrived, Lila skipped through every room of the new house, naming each space like it was a kingdom. The kitchen became Snack Castle. Her room? Queen Lila's Skyland. She stood in the middle of the backyard, arms stretched wide, wind blowing through her dress. "We're home," she said. I didn't correct her, because she was right. The next morning, I stood on our new porch with a cup of coffee, watching the dew fade from the grass. Lila was inside, feeding the cat we'd adopted from the shelter 2 days earlier. A fat orange thing she named Cinnamon. My phone buzzed. A message from Cass. "Leo asked about Lila today. He said he misses her. Just wanted you to know. I'm not pushing anything. Just sharing." I stared at the screen for a while, then typed back. "Tell him we're doing okay. And that I hope he's getting the help he needs. No more, no less." I didn't have space in my life for resentment anymore. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I refused to live under its weight. I walked back inside, set my phone down, and joined Lila at the table. She was making cereal castles and explaining the structural flaws of soggy cornflakes. "Mom," she said suddenly, "you know what's cool? What's that? I'm not scared anymore." I looked at her, so sure, so steady. "Neither am I," I whispered. We clinked spoons. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, and it was enough. 3 months after we moved into the new house, I found myself standing barefoot in the backyard, coffee in hand, watching the morning sun warm the apple tree we'd claimed as ours. There was something sacred about that quiet, the kind that speaks louder than applause, that says, "You made it," without needing to shout. Lila was inside getting ready for school, humming while she brushed her hair. These days, that sound felt like a kind of music I didn't even know I'd been missing. Not just because she was happy again, but because it meant she felt safe, grounded. And so did I. In the weeks since we'd settled in, our days had grown full, not busy, just full. With little things. Cinnamon meowing at sunrise for breakfast. Lila drawing chalk galaxies on the sidewalk. Me learning how to care for an actual backyard garden instead of a storefront bouquet. The shop was still running, of course. Mia had taken over the front-end management, and I spent more time working with schools, community groups, even hosting flower therapy workshops. Turns out, people heal around plants, and flowers listen better than most. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Lila met with Martha, her counselor, at the community center near school. They'd talk, paint, sometimes just sit and sip juice boxes. Martha said Lila was emotionally rebuilding. I liked that term. It didn't pretend things had never broken, but it honored the effort it takes to put them back together. I didn't talk to Cass much, or Mom, but the silence between us no longer felt heavy, just necessary. A pause. Maybe one day we'd speak again, but if we didn't, I was okay with that too. Sometimes survival isn't about reconnection. Sometimes it's just about reclaiming your peace. One Sunday morning, Lila and I baked muffins. She wore an apron 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled, cheeks dusted with flour. She cracked eggs with both hands like a pro. Out of nowhere, she said, "Remember when Leo pushed me?" I froze for a second. "Yeah," I said gently. "I remember." She stirred slowly, thoughtful. "I don't dream about it anymore." I set the bowl down. "I'm really glad." Then she added, "But I think maybe he didn't know how to stop. Like he was full of something mean and didn't know how to let it out." I didn't say anything at first. I was too busy feeling the weight of her words. I think you're right, I said eventually. That doesn't make what he did okay. But I think you're right. She nodded once, firm and quiet. I hope he gets better. There it was. Not forgiveness, not yet, but compassion. The kind that doesn't excuse, but understands. And that, to me, was bigger than anything a courtroom could have given us. Fall came fast that year. Gold leaves littered the yard, and Lila insisted we rake them into piles just so she could jump in. She laughed so hard, she fell backward and left an imprint of herself in the leaves like a snow angel. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching her drawing at the kitchen table. Mom? Yeah? When I'm big, I want to help kids too. My throat caught. You already do, honey. More than you know. She grinned, holding up her newest picture, two girls holding hands under a tree with the words, "You're safe," written above their heads. I pinned it to the fridge, right next to the first picture she ever drew after the hospital. A family of two. Now it was three. Me, her, and a girl in a yellow dress with short hair. I didn't ask who it was. Sometimes healing draws friends we haven't met yet. That winter, I was asked to speak at a local parent group. I nearly said no. Public speaking was never my thing. But when I told Lila, she said, "You're really good at telling the truth. Just say the truth." So I did. I stood in a room full of strangers and told our story. Not the drama of it, not the legal parts, but the quiet parts. The nights I sat up wondering if I'd done enough. The moment I saw dried blood in my daughter's hair and realized the world wasn't safe just because it was family. The decision to believe my child before anyone else. I talked about silence and how dangerous it can be. I talked about how small bravery looks when it shows up in the form of a child, whispering, "It hurts," and how huge that bravery becomes when it's finally heard. Afterward, a woman came up to me crying, said she'd suspected something at her sister's house for months but didn't want to start trouble. Said, maybe now she'd stop being quiet. That night, I cried too, because I realized something. We didn't just survive it. We were helping others survive too. The following spring, Lila turned 8. We invited her classmates, a few neighbors, and Martha the counselor. She didn't want a fancy party, just backyard games, cupcakes, and a treasure hunt. When the day came, the yard was filled with squeals and laughter. Cinnamon the cat kept sneaking under the table to steal crumbs, and someone started a water balloon fight that soaked the whole left side of my jeans. Lila opened her gifts one by one. Books, markers, a fluffy pink blanket. Then she got to the last box. A small, square package wrapped in purple paper. She looked at me. "Who's this from?" I read the card. "To my brave girl. I'm still learning. Thank you for being patient. Love, Grandma." Lila stared at the card for a long time, then opened the box. Inside was a small music box with a garden etched into the lid. When she turned the key, it played a lullaby I hadn't heard since she was a toddler. Her favorite song. She didn't say much, just set it on the windowsill and let it play. Later that night, after the kids had gone home and the sun dipped behind the apple tree, Lila crawled into my lap on the porch swing. She was tired, sticky with frosting, smiling. "Today was good," she murmured. It was. She looked up at me. "Do you think people can change?" "I think they can try," I said. "Sometimes trying is the best they can do." She nodded and leaned against me. "Then I hope Grandma keeps trying." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close. "She will," I whispered. "And even if she doesn't, we're okay." Because we were. More than okay. We were growing. Together. Story 2. Melissa Johnson groaned as she looked out her car window at the Christmas lights that were illuminating Boston's streets. Complicated feelings were constantly evoked by the drive to her childhood home. For the first time in 3 years, the whole family was hoping to get together this Christmas. "How long till we get at Grandma's place, Mom?" The voice from the back seat was Tyler's. The 9-year-old youngster, wearing a blue down jacket, had eagerness and joy in his eyes. Tyler was gazing out the window at the snowy scenery while he played with a portable gaming console on his lap. "Tyler, another 15 minutes or so. Let's finish the game quickly. When we get there, I want you to be prepared to appropriately meet Grandma." Melissa looked at her kid in the rearview mirror and grinned. People frequently remarked that Tyler's looks looked like her ex-husband Richard. But since their divorce 3 years ago, his kind nature has taken after her. Richard had spent every weekend with Tyler, taking his role as a parent very seriously. For Tyler's benefit, they remained respectfully connected even though their relationship was over. Will one actually receive a PlayStation 5? Tyler's voice was a mixture of doubt and optimism. Melissa was careful with her word choice. Tyler, as I've mentioned previously, Santa gives good kids great gifts, but you never know what's inside until you open it. In actuality, Melissa was unable to purchase a PlayStation 5 for Tyler. Although she had a steady work at a big insurance business, it was difficult for her to balance extracurricular activities, school fees, food, and rent as a single mother. Eleanor, her mother, had been evasive in her response when she asked her about this year's Christmas gifts. "What do you suppose Santa will give Brandon?" Tyler inquired. Brandon was a year older than Tyler and the son of Melissa's sister, Carol. Melissa responded that she was surprised, but her worry increased on the inside. Even after her husband passed away, Eleanor had continued to lead a refined and busy life. She openly liked Carol's kid, Brandon, which was the issue. Melissa had suffered from her mother's prejudiced behavior since she was a little child, and Tyler was consistently viewed as second best. "I've arranged a special surprise for Brandon," Eleanor had mentioned in a recent phone conversation. "I got aid from Carol." As Melissa's pulse began to race with fear at hearing this, Eleanor said, "Don't worry, I'm also thinking of something for Tyler." But when the car pulled into the posh Beacon Hill district, her voice was unconvinced. Melissa became more tense. Once the scene of her and Carol's joyful upbringing, her mother's home was a stunning 3-story brownstone. Now that she was an adult, Melissa experienced conflicting feelings about this place. "Whoa! Fantastic!" Tyler cried out. When the youngster saw the brilliant decorations on the front porch and the lit-up Christmas tree in front of the home, his eyes glistened. After parking, Melissa inhaled deeply. "So, should we leave?" The door opened and Eleanor emerged as the two made their way to the entryway. Her graceful physique has a timeless quality. Her social standing was demonstrated by her immaculately maintained white hair and her pricey cashmere jumper. "At last, Melissa Tyler, you succeeded." Eleanor said hello to them. She kissed Melissa's cheek and touched Tyler's head tenderly. It was a cold gesture. "Hi, Mother." Melissa tried to give her mother a hug, but Eleanor had already begun to go toward the foyer. "Michael and Carol have already arrived." Eleanor mentioned that Brandon had been anticipating your arrival. "This Christmas is unique. We haven't all been together in years." Melissa grinned at Tyler and wrapped a kind arm over his shoulders. "Are you ready? Let's visit Brandon, your aunt, and your uncle." Although Tyler nodded, his eyes had a tinge of nervousness. Melissa was able to read her son's emotions. Brandon had always taken center stage at previous Christmases, and Eleanor had hardly ever paid attention to Tyler when they came into the living room. There sat Carol, her husband Michael, and their 10-year-old son Brandon. Carol was always the sister who was successful. They possessed an opulent suburban home, and Michael had made good real estate investments. Melissa Tyler. Carol got to her feet and gave her sister a hug. Melissa's nose ached from the powerful smell of her perfume. "Brandon, you made it at last." "Greet your cousin," Brandon grimaced as he got to his feet. He wore the newest styles and was a head taller than Tyler. "Hey, Tyler," he remarked icily. "Hi, Brandon." Tyler's voice was small as he answered. Eleanor came back into the room and drew Brandon in. "Brandon, some delicious cookies were cooked by Grandma. The kitchen is where they are. Bring Tyler along." Reluctantly, Brandon agreed and beckoned to Tyler before the two guys departed the room. Eleanor spoke to Melissa while seated on the couch. "Last week, Brandon took first place in the math competition at his school. Carol is doing a great job developing his skills." "That's great," Melissa said, keeping her smile intact. "Last month, Tyler took home a prize from the science fair." "Well," Eleanor remarked apathetically, "that's nice." Talking about the new automobile that Carol's husband, Michael, had just bought, Melissa was seated on the couch. She questioned if she would be able to remain calm during Christmas. It hurt her to consider how Tyler was affected by her mother's increasingly obvious preference over the years. Nevertheless, she was resolved to maintain her smile for the benefit of her kid. It had to be a unique Christmas. She tried to make Tyler's Christmas memories joyful despite her mother's negativity. Christmas decorations graced Carol and Michael's opulent two-story house. The air smelled like cinnamon, pine, and baked goods, and the corridor from the door to the living room was adorned with gold and silver ornaments. A huge Christmas tree, nearly to the ceiling, stood by the window in the living room. Numerous strings of LED lights emitted warm light, and crystal decorations glittered beneath the tree, along with stacks of gifts wrapped in vibrant colors. Tyler's face lit up with delight as he saw this. "Are all those gifts, Mom?" Before Melissa could respond, he inquired in a low voice. Beside them, Eleanor materialized and touched Tyler's shoulder. "The majority are for Brandon." Carol received several gifts from his pals. Eleanor proceeded after giving her grandson a gentle head rub. "However, you could find something to do." Tyler's eager face briefly became hazy, but he soon regained his composure. Melissa murmured in her son's ear while drawing him near. "Santa is still thinking about you." The sumptuous Christmas dinner food, which revolved on a roast turkey and included mashed potatoes, gravy sauce, cranberry sauce, and other roasted vegetables, was undoubtedly spread out on the dining table. Fine china and silver silverware adorned the table. "Please take a seat, everyone," Eleanor declared. "Grandma sits next to you, Brandon." Michael sat down and started pouring wine. "It must be difficult to raise a child alone," he said, smiling amiably as he filled Melissa's glass. "Does Richard pay enough in child support?" "We're managing fine," Melissa said, keeping her smile intact. "Richard is helpful." "However, didn't he get married again?" Carol spoke up. "Is he too busy taking care of his new family to take care of Tyler?" "Every weekend, he spends time with Tyler." With her son listening from the other side of the table, Melissa spoke softly. She made an effort to shift the conversation. "The turkey appears to be very tasty." "Carol, this year's dinner was fantastic as well," but Eleanor paid no attention to the change. "Tyler, I've heard that last week there was an incident at school. Your instructor gave you a call." Tyler turned to face his grandmother would be unexpected. Melissa scowled. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "Richard informed me," Eleanor answered coolly. "Tyler finds it difficult to focus in class. He requires a more orderly upbringing." Melissa inhaled sharply. "Yes, Tyler's teacher had called after he did poorly on a math test last week." She didn't know how Eleanor had learned, but she had told Richard. Melissa calmly said, "It's a small matter, Mom. I've taken care of it already. Tyler is studying with his teacher after school, and he'll do better on the next test." "Brandon is always excellent," Carol said proudly. "His teachers praise him constantly." "Really?" Michael said jokingly. "From what I've heard, there were some issues during physical education class." "Michael," Carol reprimanded her husband. "Just kidding," Michael laughed. "Brandon is our family genius, excelling at everything." Throughout the meal, the conversation revolved around Brandon's grades and extracurricular activities, and Michael and Carol's recent luxury resort vacation. Melissa occasionally nodded and smiled, continuing her meal calmly. Tyler ate quietly, occasionally casting anxious glances at his mother. As dinner was coming to an end, Eleanor moved closer to Melissa and whispered, "I'm worried about Tyler's future with your parenting. Being a single mother is hard enough, but you should discipline him more." Melissa hid her distress and responded gently, "Tyler is a wonderful child. Mom, he's growing at his own pace." "Well, do as you wish," Eleanor sighed. "By the way, I've prepared something special for Tyler this Christmas. You'll be surprised." Those words deepened Melissa's anxiety. There was something ominous in Eleanor's mention of a special present. However, she didn't want to create conflict during the family's Christmas Eve gathering. She simply smiled and said, "Thank you, Mom." When dessert was served, Brandon exclaimed excitedly, "What about the presents? Can we open them now?" After dinner, Brandon Carol calmed her son. "There's a special surprise, so be patient a little longer." Tyler looked up at Melissa. "Do I have a surprise too?" Melissa gently stroked her son's hair. "Christmas is always full of surprises. It's time for presents," Eleanor announced in a high-pitched voice. The family, having finished their apple pie and ice cream dessert, began gathering in the living room under the enormous Christmas tree. Colorful presents seemed to shine, Tyler's eyes gleamed with expectation. For weeks, he had been talking about the PlayStation 5. Many of his friends already had one, and Tyler had tried it at an arcade. He was completely captivated by the rich graphics and immersive gameplay. First for Brandon. Eleanor smiled, picking up the largest box and handing it to her great-grandson. This is a special present from Grandma. Brandon excitedly took the box and immediately tore off the wrapping paper. Wow, a 5! He shouted, holding up the box. Fantastic! It comes with 2 controllers and 5 games. Carol and Michael applauded, with Carol saying, Santa knows what a good boy Brandon has been. Michael patted his son's shoulder and laughed. Looks like you'll be gaming all weekend. Tyler watched silently, his face showing a mixture of expectation and envy. Melissa held her son's hand and smiled encouragingly. She had prepared a different gift for Tyler, though it wasn't as flashy as a 5. Next, Tyler Eleanor picked up another large box. It was the same size as the 5 box. A special gift from Grandma. Tyler's face lit up brightly. He rushed over to receive the box and gave Melissa a grateful look. Melissa smiled back, though confused. She hadn't heard about this present. Had her mother really bought Tyler at 5? Open it. Tyler. Brandon said he had already opened his PPS 5 and began setting it up. Tyler carefully unwrapped the paper, and indeed there was a PlayStation 5 box. Yes, he cheered. Mom, look, Grandma got me a 5. Melissa responded to her son's joy despite her confusion. That's wonderful. Tyler, you should thank Grandma. Thank you, Grandma. Tyler excitedly began opening the box. Eleanor smirked and looked at Carol and Michael. They wore similar smiles. Melissa felt uneasy and stared at her mother. Something was off. When Tyler opened the box, there was styrofoam padding inside. After removing it, there was nothing. Just an old phone card and a small envelope. Silence fell over the room. Tyler looked into the box with a confused expression, checking to see if he'd missed anything. Grandma, this. His voice trembled. Oh, Tyler. Eleanor put her hand to her mouth, pretending surprise. Did Santa mix up the boxes? And then she began to chuckle. Carol and Michael joined in. Santa only comes to good children, Eleanor said to her laughter. Tyler, I heard you did poorly on tests at school this year and your teacher called. Santa monitors those things. Tears welled up in Tyler's eyes. His thin shoulders heaved and he bit his lip, struggling to stifle his tears. In contrast, Brandon was enthusiastically laying out his genuine PS5 on the floor, gleefully exploring his new games. Don't weep now, Eleanor murmured coldly. This is a lesson. You'll have to strive harder next year. Mom, Melissa murmured in a shaky voice. Her face was distorted with wrath and anguish. What? It's a joke, just a joke. Eleanor waved her hand. Tyler will understand when he grows up, as the grown-ups surrounding him battled to conceal their laughs. Tyler's face got blazing red and he abruptly sprang up and raced out of the room. Tyler, Melissa went down the corridor after her son. She heard the door of the guest room close. The door was knocked on by Melissa. Could I come in, Tyler? There was a little no. Melissa came in and saw her kid sitting on the bed with his knees embraced. His cheeks were stained and wet. I apologize, Tyler. She wrapped her arm over her kid and sat next to him. Grandma did something awful. I was unaware that this would occur. Am I a horrible kid? Tyler's voice was small as he asked. Not getting a 5 is bad enough? No, Melissa firmly stated. You're a fantastic youngster. Grandma made a mistake. You are worthy of any gift. Melissa hugged her kid as Tyler leaned against his mother and sobbed softly. She felt her temper building. Although her mother had previously shown cruelty, it was unacceptable for her to publicly humiliate her little son in this way. Rest here for a moment, Melissa whispered softly after reassuring her kid for a time. I'll be right back. She went to her purse from the bag after leaving the guest room. She produced a little, wrapped package. Melissa really had a gift for Eleanor. She had picked the present carefully, wishing to strengthen their bond. However, a new resolution suddenly entered her heart. She gently slid another envelope into the box after taking it out of her bag. After inhaling deeply, she went back to the living room. As they entered, Michael, Carol, and Eleanor were quietly opening further gifts. Brandon was already using his new PS5 while seated on the floor. They all acted as though she hadn't returned. Melissa silently presented the little gift to Eleanor as she stood just in front of her. "Happy Christmas, Mom," she murmured calmly. Even though she was grinning, her eyes were icy and focused. Eleanor was surprised when she saw the box. "A gift for myself." Curious, she took the box. "What may it be?" Melissa remained silent. She simply watched in silence as her mother opened the gift. Eleanor gently took off the wrapping paper and loosened the ribbon. She extracted the envelope from the tiny white box after opening it. When she saw the contents of the envelope in Eleanor's fingers, she opened it and froze. "Fill out the Golden Years application. Retreat is a retirement community." Every field on the form was completed, with the exception of the signature line. There was a message attached, written neatly by Melissa. "Santa also doesn't appear to like nasty grandparents." Eleanor's face drained of blood. Her hands shook a little, and her eyes enlarged in a look of rage and panic. "What is this?" Her voice trembled as she said, "It's not a humorous joke." The living room's air froze. Even Brandon looked up from his game, and Carol and Michael exchanged bewildered glances. Melissa whispered, "Mom, it's not a joke." She spoke clearly but in a quiet voice. "Nor was your gift to Tyler a joke, was it?" Eleanor picked up the papers and got to her feet. "What are you doing, in your opinion? Do you mean to threaten me?" "That's not a threat. It's just an option," Melissa said, trying to sound composed. "His age is 9 years. How could a 9-year-old child be so easily humiliated and harmed in front of another child, Mom?" It was instructive. Eleanor's voice rose. "Tyler will just have issues down the road as a result of coddling." Melissa's eyes flashed with educational rage. "Is publicly degrading a youngster considered educational? Or are Carol and Brandon the only people you care about?" Carol spoke up. "Calm down, Melissa. Mother only has Tyler's best interests in mind. Keep silent," Melissa said to Carol in a chilly tone. "This plan also included you. Will you not? You really have no idea what it's like to crush a child's feelings." "This is blackmail," Eleanor remarked, waving the retirement home application with shaky palms. "Will you put me in a situation like this? Do you want my money? Cash?" Melissa smiled bitterly. "All I want is for Tyler's granny to adore him. However, if that isn't feasible, it's best if we stay apart." "A little distance." Eleanor's gaze expanded. "Yes," Melissa answered resolutely. "I'll have to reevaluate our relationship if you injure Tyler. I will never be able to forgive today's events." "Melissa," Carol let out a cry. "Mom is becoming old. You're not being faithful. Unfilial." Melissa gave her sister a stern look. "Isn't the real meaning of unfilial to protect someone who harms children?" "Everyone," Michael muttered tensely as he got up. "It's Christmas Eve. It is a family get-together. Let's relax." Eleanor, however, was shaking with rage. "Leave now! Leave my house, unappreciative daughter," Melissa said gently. "Thank you. We're departing, Tyler." Tyler stood, his eyes puffy and red, having just emerged from the guest room. Melissa helped her kid put on his coat by taking his hand. "Mom," Tyler remarked quietly, "I no longer like Grandma." Melissa gave her kid a hug. "I get it. However, it's all right. We'll celebrate Christmas on our own." As they made their way to the door, from behind, Eleanor yelled, "Brandon is not someone Tyler will ever be like. That youngster is being ruined by your stupid coddling." Melissa didn't turn around. Silently, she unlocked the car door and escorted her kid out into the snowy night. Tyler was looking out the window at the wintry scenery while he sobbed quietly. "Really, am I a horrible kid? Since I am unable to emulate Brandon?" Melissa turned to face her son after bringing the car to the curb. "Listen, Tyler." She held his face tenderly in her palms. "You are an amazing youngster. Aunt Carol and Grandma are incorrect. You're not like Brandon, of course. Everybody has unique personalities and skills. The 5 Santas do, however, come to good kids." Melissa grinned. "Tonight, the real Santa will arrive. Trust me." Tyler's face was half doubtful, but then a glimmer of hope came back into his eyes. Richard's car was in the parking lot when they got home. He was waiting for them in the snow, standing next to his car. "Dad!" Running to his father, Tyler leaped from the car. Lifting his son, Richard whirled him around. Tiger, hello, happy Christmas. He gave his ex-wife a smile. You returned early. Melissa smiled back at him, looking exhausted. The story is lengthy. The trio went into the apartment. There was a small Christmas tree in the living room, with a number of gifts spread out underneath it. Richard looked at his son. There's a unique gift from Santa. Mom and I worked together to prepare it. He produced a big box. Tyler gave the box a terrified glance. Is this also empty? See by opening it. Melissa spoke softly. After carefully removing the wrapping paper, Tyler opened the box. A genuine PlayStation 5 with the games he had desired was inside. Whoa. Tyler's face became bright. It's true. An actual 5. Tyler, have a happy Christmas. As he stroked his son's hair, Richard spoke. After discussing it with Mom, I specifically asked Santa to arrive early. Tyler flung himself to his parents and gave them a firm embrace. Mom, thank you. I'm grateful, Dad. Thank you, Santa. I will. Richard started to configure the gaming system as Melissa giggled. In the kitchen, Melissa prepared hot chocolate. She was still filled with anger and despair, but she was sure that she had made the correct choice after witnessing her son's unadulterated happiness. Tyler remarked abruptly, I don't want to go to Grandma's house. Never again. Melissa wrapped her arm over her son's shoulders as she sat down on the couch next to him. You don't have to go for a while, I know. Brandon and Aunt Carol are both unlikable to me, Melissa said softly. We'll avoid them too. We have a family of our own. Dad with Jennifer, his new bride. Mom, you are loved by everyone. I adore you over anything. Tyler rested his head on his mom. Melissa gave her kid a head kiss. When her cell phone vibrated, she saw that Carol had called. Disregarding it, she switched off the electricity. Her kid, her ex-husband, and her tiny family celebrated Christmas tonight. She may be able to mend her relationship with her mother, or it may not. However, she had no regrets about her choice to keep Tyler safe. Melissa now understood the true meaning of Christmas as she watched Tyler grin while the snow continued to fall softly outside the window. It was true love, not lavish mansions or pricey things. On a March day when Boston's streets were starting to warm under the spring light, within Melissa's office, the phone rang. She was shocked to read the caller's name, Eleanor Hamilton, as she looked up from her insurance contract paperwork. Since Christmas Eve, there has been no communication. Hi there? Melissa's voice was stiff when she responded. Melissa? Eleanor's voice lacked its customary tone of dignity and sounded weak. I hoped we could have a conversation. Melissa was taken aback. She had never heard such humility in her mother's voice. Mom, what is it? If it's feasible, Tyler and I would also like to meet Eleanor. Tyler is motionless. Eleanor cut Melissa off before she could finish. I get it. I want to apologize, but it's understandable that he doesn't want to see me. Melissa said nothing. She had never heard her mother apologize in such a way before. Would you want to have lunch at Beacon Hills Cafe Boston tomorrow? Eleanor inquired. I'll let you make that decision about Tyler. Okay, Melissa said. But swear to me that you will treat Tyler with respect if he shows up. Eleanor's voice was genuine, I assure you. Melissa and Tyler went into the cafe the following day. Tyler held his mother's hand tightly and appeared anxious. Eleanor, who was already sitting near the window, waved hesitantly at them. Hi there, Tyler. Eleanor gave her grandson a kind grin. I appreciate you visiting Grandma. Tyler gave a quiet nod. Melissa sat opposite Eleanor and put a hand on her son's shoulder. First, I apologize, Eleanor stated in reference to Christmas Day. Tyler, I sincerely apologize. Grandma made a horrible mistake. I sincerely regret it, but I won't beg for pardon. Tyler gazed at his grandma in silence. Melissa had never noticed such a vulnerability in her mother's face. In fact, Eleanor went on, I saw the doctor last month. I was given a mild dementia diagnosis. Melissa took a deep breath. Mom, do not be concerned. Eleanor gestured with her hand. Even if it's early, it caused me to consider how I behave. Actually, I read the pamphlet you sent me on retirement homes. Next week, I'm going on a tour. You're kidding, Melissa said, startled. Eleanor's response was serious. I'm not kidding. I realized what I was about to lose that Christmas. Family. Actual family. Tyler sipped his hot chocolate in silence as he slowly relaxed. Eleanor gave her grandson a kind grin. Are you having fun with the PS5? She inquired. Indeed. At last, Tyler said something. It was given to me by my parents. Melissa was astounded by her mother's change, and the interaction grew more organic over time. Carol's family was going, but they were not mentioned. Eleanor took Melissa's arm softly. Can we meet up again? Every Sunday? I would want to attend Tyler's baseball games. I'll give it some thought, Melissa said. Even though she was still cautious, she couldn't help but notice how sincere her mother's eyes were. Melissa then started asking Eleanor out to dinner once a month. Tyler gradually started to regain his grandmother's confidence, albeit it took some time. Carol's familial connections, however, continued to be chilly. One day, Carol told a friend that her mother had become weak. However, as Eleanor's relationship with Melissa's family became closer, she started to notice that she was growing more alone. As spring gave way to summer, Melissa came to the realization that family is based on love and respect for one another rather than genetic connections.